Alive? I'm alive. What will it be like, I wondered? I have a mind and a body and a consciousness all of my own. If I had a mouth or a throat or lungs, I would have laughed aloud. But of course, I still didn't quite exist. One can't expect a technically non-existent entity to have any of those things. Instead, I just let the glow of the idea fill me. The life of a could-be, or rather the unlife of a could-be, was spent drifting. We never land, never see, never experience. But sometimes one of us gets the chance. Once in an eternity, we get the calling to life. What will it feel like to finally land? To finally exist in the world, not as a half-baked concept, but as a real, solid being? I had heard the had-beens muttering worriedly around the cognizants lately. It was clear that something was bothering them.
Ridiculous.
I've heard he's not going to do it this time.
Foolish one, this one. I've always said that dear boy is too stubborn for his own good.
Perhaps he's right. Perhaps it is our time.
My shelf's not even half full.
I watched the gardener as the others scoffed and glared at him. He simply smiled a sad little smile and returned to tending his flowers.
We still have things to do.
I hadn't really cared that much back then. Back before I'd felt the first glimmers of life. I had simply drifted away, not bothering to listen to the rest of the had-beens bickering. All of us in the cognizance had long since grown tired of it. But today I would go seek them out. Today was different. Today I was alive. Each of the had-beens' own little worlds were, of course, technically infinite, but their warm golden glow could be seen from almost anywhere. I wondered if I will glow when I am alive. I found myself in the library, tall, winding bookshelves pressed together into a labyrinth of histories and hymns and poems and novels. The shelves climbed forever into the sky, each volume placed meticulously on its shelf. And of course, there was the librarian, the sharp old man who wore his golden glow like a cape around his shoulders. I would say I watched him with a smile if I had lips to make such an expression with.
Hello, my dear.
That was new. He could see me. I wanted to laugh, even I couldn't see me. What a strange creature these had-beens were.
You're almost there, aren't you? Soon you'll be like us. Well, you'll be more than us. So much more.
How is it possible to be more? More than a creature who'd been touched by life?
Grandfather!
I had seen this memory occupy the library on many occasions. In fact, it was rare to see the man wandering the halls without her.
Is it happening again, Grandfather?
Yes, my dear child. But we mustn't frighten them. We've never done it before. I dare say it will be an interesting experience.
Good luck. You'll love it out there.
The memories had never been touched by life, but they knew of it. They were modelled off it. They were perhaps the closest besides the had-beens.
Yes. Life is a funny thing. A very funny thing. But remember this. Our experiences make us who we are. We are lost without them. We are nothing without them. But with them, we can be anything.
Normally, drifting along the beach was supposed to be done slowly. You're meant to enjoy the sun as it sets over the ocean. But of course, the sun is always setting here. And I was in a hurry. It was a strange feeling. I'd never been in a hurry before. It seemed for some reason like I should be going somewhere. Wherever that somewhere was, it was of terrible importance. His glow attracted me to a little patch of sand close to the water. There, the musician sat and played. He swayed back and forth as his glow flowed through the little instrument and wreathed itself around him. I could feel something inside me rising and falling with each note.
Oh my giddy aunt! Oh, it's happening, isn't it?
The little man danced about, and as he did, the ferocity of his glow grew and grew. It was so hot, so bright. How could it possibly be so intense? It was burning me away. It was blinding me. Stop it!
Oh my! Oh my! I'm sorry. I didn't. This must all be very new for you. I didn't mean to overwhelm.
Is this what life was like? All of a sudden I wondered if I really wanted to experience it.
Oh, don't worry. I know it's a little intense now, but you'll get used to it.
Oh, you'll love it, won't he, Doctor?
Quite right, Jamie.
Aye. If only you said that more often.
The light flared again, lashing out at me, attacking me. I jerked away in fear. I didn't want to experience that again. It was too much to bear.
I know it's a bit intense, but there is no point in life if it is not lived with love and joy.
Oh, aye.
Your life is for you to fill. You can fill it with wisdom and experience and intellect, but you will never be able to do what we do if you do not fill it with this as well.
The music filled the sky and the sand and the ocean. It soared and dived and dipped through the air, and this time I did not turn away. The scientist stood, as he usually did, leaning over a little table, peering into a microscope. His golden energy spread out in front of him, settling inside the tubes and containers and implements scattered all around.
It's you. It's happening already, is it? I thought it might.
I'd never really understood the scientist. He spoke in facts and numbers and knowledge that seemed meaningless to anyone but him. His world managed to be infinite in a very different way to the rest. It was a small infinity. The endlessness lay in the little things. The lab itself appeared to be quite small and cramped. The white walls barely seemed big enough to house the towers of equipment. But if one were to inhabit this mess, they would find that there was always just a bit more room whenever they needed it.
Come closer.
He beckoned me to his side and indicated the microscope he had been peering through.
Look there. Do you see?
I looked through the little lenses. On the dish sat two little specks of brilliance. As I watched, they moved about, creating an intricate dance around each other. They sparkled and glittered in little bursts of energy, the bluish glow flowing around them, infusing them with more and more energy.
It's new. Brand new. Unknown. Amazing, is it not?
I moved away, allowing him back to the microscope, still buzzing with the images of the brilliant unknown.
Liz, have you seen this?
Yes. I helped concoct the amniotic fluid, remember?
Oh, yes. I suppose you helped a bit.
More like a lot. You nearly forgot to regulate the glucagon levels. It would have been disastrous.
I suppose you're right. Anyway, it's fascinating.
His glow brightened with excitement as he snatched up a petri dish from one of the piles and set it onto his workstation. He disappeared into the towers of stuff, grabbing implements seemingly at random as he rushed by.
Now, Liz, where did I put the, thank you. Would you be so kind and hold this for a moment?
With that, he dumped a heavy microscope into my hands. Hands! I had hands! I was holding something, I was touching something real. I just stayed there, staring in marvel at my new... It wasn't exactly a body. Not yet. Life had slowly started to trickle into me, and I had no clue what to do with it.
Ah, I see. It's new, and new can be terrifying. But our minds need new things. Our minds will dull without new discovery. Never let your mind be dulled. Never let your hands lie idle. A sharp mind and quick hands can always be relied on.
I felt his warm golden light wash over my hands as he took back the equipment. The cobbled streets of the little town zigzagged up and down as I made my way through it. This world was a busy one. Entities of all kinds roamed the streets, memories and nightmares and could-bes and ghosts all crammed together in the bustling town. That is how the storyteller liked it. He always liked his crowds. I found him sitting on an obscure-looking doorstep, deep in the throes of some epic tale. His golden light curled around him like a scarf.
Now, did I ever tell you the one about the metal machines and the madman who created them?
No.
I did.
I recognised several of the memories. The young man who held himself so straight and tall, a cheerful woman in the striped overalls, a lady in a hat whose face seemed to walk back and forth in the shadows.
You've told us about that one 100 times.
The mistress is correct, master.
Oh, K9. The mistress is always correct. Well, what did you learn from it then?
A woman stood up, brandishing a long knife.
So that one's easy. Never let the Daleks win.
Ah, but they did win, didn't they?
Evil must be defeated, no matter the cost.
The storyteller looked at her for a moment, and then turned and looked directly at me. His eyes held such an intensity that I couldn't look away.
Is that what you believe?
I froze. What could I possibly say to that? Yes, the thought jumped out at me. Yes, I do believe it.
Yes, it's a noble thought, but let me tell you something. Something you would probably rather not hear. Evil can never be truly defeated. It will always exist out there somewhere, no matter what you do. And sometimes, it wins.
I felt a great chill as he gazed deep into me, imploring, demanding that I listen.
Do not fight against evil. Fight for good. And maybe you can make the universe just a little bit better.
A smile lit up his whole face. The garden stretched on forever. Leaves shone the greenest green. The sky hung above, a sheet of the bluest blue. The garden was perfect. Anyone who set foot in it agreed. Yet it was a very peculiar garden. There seemed to be no pattern or design to it. There were no perfectly manicured shrubs or neat little rows of flowers. Instead, everything grew as they pleased. Petunias mixed in with lilies and wild roses, bushes and shrubs sprung up every which way. Trees grew up into the sky wherever they so desired. It was beautiful. The gardener was deep in his fields, his light shining like a beacon, strong and vibrant. He hummed a tune to himself as he placed a new flower in a freshly dug hole.
Ah, hello. Are you enjoying the garden? I was hoping for a little rain today. The rosemary and irises could use it. But it seems we'll have to do without. Sometimes this place is just a little too perfect, I find.
What a strange thing to say. How can something be too perfect?
Are you still whinging about the run?
Not whinging, Tegan. I don't whinge.
In a pig's eye, you don't.
Oh, leave him alone, Tegan. Besides, I'd be careful who I accuse of whinging if I were you.
What's that supposed to mean, Nissa?
You don't exactly suffer silently, do you, Tegan?
Oi, I didn't come here to be lectured by a child.
What about a schoolboy, then?
Oh, don't you get me started, Turlough.
You lot never stop bickering. I'm always reasonable. Oi, I'll watch what comes out and be careful with what I'm saying to her.
I watched as the memories walked together further out into the field. I wondered why the gardener didn't get up to follow them. It seemed to be far more enjoyable than digging in the dirt.
Someone has to tend the garden. Oh, I don't mind.
I drifted in close to his side as he got to digging another hole. Slowly, tentatively, I reached out with my new hands. They brushed against the petal of a tiny yellow flower. It was so delicate beneath my touch, so fragile, such a tiny thing.
Wonderful, isn't it? It's not big or strong or noticeable. It's not good or evil, or even particularly important. It just is.
He lifted his head and turned to face me, for the first time giving me his full attention.
Cherish the little things. Even the life of the smallest, most delicate flower deserves our love.
The intensity and sincerity of his words struck me. Unconsciously, I took a step back.
Oh.
The gardener's cheerful face fell as he looked down at the ground beneath me. In confusion, I looked down as well, and I would have gasped if I could. Beneath me was a little purple flower, its stem broken beneath my feet. Her feet. Panic started to claw its way through me as I flinched away from the plant. I had never been able to touch or influence anything before, and one of the first things I did was break and destroy and hurt. I didn't want this. How can I protect them all?
It's all right.
He turned his attention to the injured plant. From his pocket he pulled out a little bamboo stick and a strip of fabric. With care, he burrowed the tiny stake into the soil next to the flower. He held the broken stem up gently and bonded it to the bamboo with a little piece of fabric.
It will heal in time, and it will heal stronger than it ever was before. We can't always prevent this. There should be another way, but even if we can't find it, we must never give up.
He gave me the warmest smile before looking across the field to his friends.
And sometimes you should just go play cricket.
He leapt up onto his feet with newfound joy.
One day, when it's over, you can join us.
He laughed and turned away, sprinting to the cricket pitch out in the field. Bickering and laughing and joking, the memories went to join him. The white tent rose before me like a splash of paint against the sky. This world could be heard from almost anywhere in the cognizance. I had often wondered how these creatures could be so loud. The creatures I had overheard once were called children, and children, it seemed, were very noisy creatures indeed. The clown stood, as he always did, in the centre of everything. The children and memories and ghosts flocked to him as his light clothed him in every colour imaginable.
Gather round, gather round. Now, who here wants to see something amazing?
The memory of an elderly woman with silvery white hair and half-moon glasses sat in a chair beside the clown, contentedly sipping on a mug of cocoa.
Now don't get them too excited. Amazing is a bit of a stretch, if you ask me.
Well, Evelyn, my dear, I'd like to see you juggle 6 eggs flawlessly.
I'd like to see you do that, too.
Don't listen to her, folks. I rather think she woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. Now, children, do you think I can do it? Well, I certainly wouldn't want to disappoint you. Now let's see how many of these I can hold in the air. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6!
He looked at me as if he couldn't quite believe he'd done it. The vision was mesmerising. The eggs arched high into the sky as they reached their peak before seeming to hang in place. Then they would begin to fall, propelling faster and faster towards their messy end, only to be snatched up at the last second and tossed up once more.
Evelyn, look! I'm doing it!
The children went berserk. The clown started to laugh along with them, and then the illusion was abruptly shattered. The colourful entertainer miscalculated his catch, and one by one, the eggs smashed to the ground.
Oh!
I froze, tensing in apprehension as the clown remained perfectly still on the stage, and then I watched the entire exchange in awe. Why were they laughing?
All right. Now for my next trick, I'm going to need a volunteer. Who's feeling brave today? What about you?
He pointed at me. I froze in surprise as his question sunk in. Me? Why me?
Well, come on. We don't have all day.
I felt my feet moving forward, still a strange sensation. And before I realised, I was standing on the stage next to him.
Now, beings and gentle beings, prepare to be amazed.
From his pocket, the clown produced 6 fresh eggs. A stab of fear coursed through me.
Don't worry. You're among friends here. Trust me.
I felt myself relax, despite my clawing fear. I took a step forward, the eggs in hand, shaking with anticipation. The audience held their breath. It went about as well as I had anticipated. Something rose up in me as I stood on the stage. It was something I had never felt before. Embarrassment. Intense, unpleasant embarrassment.
It's all right. Life is empty without a bit of silliness. Do not take yourself too seriously. No one else will.
I had never really figured out this world. Of course I knew what it was called. A university. Various entities inhabited this world. Some were memories, others nightmares, and occasionally one or two other could-bes. I understood why they liked it here. For an entity that knew nothing and was nothing, such a place of knowledge was intriguing. Eventually I found myself at the edge of an expansive outdoor amphitheatre. It was empty, except for 2 or 3 figures right down in the centre. 2 of them sat hunched over a large chess set. Standing over them, examining the game appreciatively, was the Professor. There had always been something indescribable about him. Perhaps it was his eyes that glittered with both light mirth and dark secrets. Yes, there was something very funny about him indeed.
Oh, hello there. Won't you join us? We're enjoying a little afternoon game.
Are you ever gonna play? This is getting boring.
The memory sitting at the game played restlessly with the bat that she had gripped under the table. The second player brought a chill to my soul. A nightmare. The energy that flowed off him was so very different from anything else in the cognizance. I had heard it described by some as a shadow darker than any other. I had always found that to be an inadequate description. The darkness that followed them wasn't just a shadow, it was a hole. It wasn't just dark, it was a complete absence of light. It surrounded all of the nightmares, swallowing them, never allowing them to be touched by anything but darkness. Sometimes I felt a little sorry for them, for what a horrible thing it must be to never know any light.
I'll play in my own time, you stupid little girl.
Now! Manners.
Yeah, that's right, you toe rag.
The nightmare was silent again for a few moments, before a wicked look started to grow on his face. The chill returned to me as he reached out his hand.
It was a cute effort, little girl, but I'm afraid you are simply no match for me.
You know, I've never cared for this one's dramatics. It's rather tiresome after a while, don't you think?
What? That's not fair! Professor, he can't do that!
Hmm? Well, I'm afraid that he can. And he did. Not very sporting, but technically allowed, I suppose.
Right, well, how am I supposed to be a cheater? You should have let me use my bat or my Nitro 9 like I said. It'd be way easier than this bollocks.
Oh, Ace. The easy way isn't always the best way. Sometimes you just have to sit down and puzzle your way out.
Fine. I'll do it. I still think my way's better.
So, what do you think her next move should be?
There were so many potential moves to make. How was I supposed to know what the right one was? The memory seemed to be having the same dilemma, uncertainty clouding her eyes. The Professor reached out and laid a reassuring hand on the young memory's shoulder.
Focus on the little things, Ace. Don't think about the entire game, or you can easily miss the important details. Just think about the impact you can make with just one singular piece and one singular move. You can do it.
I was struck by the warmth and steadiness in Sven's voice. I felt a great wave of calm come over me. Of course you could do this.
Psst, quickly, take this. While he's distracted, sneak up behind him and hit him with my umbrella.
I stared at him in shock. That was cheating.
Sometimes it takes a sharp mind and a delicate hand to win, and sometimes it takes a blunt instrument.
He flashed me a manic smile and shoved the stick into my hands. It wasn't very hard to sneak up behind the nightmare. For a creature who had, until recently, been entirely non-existent, this sort of thing wasn't exactly difficult. I raised the stick high above my head, slow and deliberate. All I had to do now was swing it down with all my force. This should be easy. Why didn't it feel easy? All I had to do was bring it down, and yet I wasn't doing that. I couldn't do that. It was cheating, wasn't it? It was wrong. What was I doing? I stood frozen, unable to move, and then I lowered my hand, feeling a heaviness in my chest that I just couldn't ignore. I looked back guiltily at the professor, expecting a look of disappointment. Instead, his face broke into a wide, knowing grin.
Ah, you're going to be one of those, are you?
Coward.
It was a test.
In part, I suppose. Although, I still think it would have been fun to see him get a good knock on the head.
God knows he deserves it.
Quite. If there's one thing you must learn, it is that the trials never cease. Life, you will find, shall continue to test you to your limits. But you may also find that your limits can be as endless as you make them.
I had never really liked this world. In fact, it was hard to imagine that anyone would like such a place. Despite the never-ending blanket of thick clouds and fog that covered everything, not a single drop of rain ever fell from the sky. As the first gravestone appeared over the horizon, rising up like a great stone claw, I began to wonder who would ever choose to inhabit such a place. The answer, it seemed, was the gravekeeper. His light felt somehow muted, quieter than the others had been, and he looked incredibly small, kneeling beside a single tombstone within the endless rows of graves. From his satchel, he was extracting a handful of little seeds and plopping them down into holes in the soil. Next to him, lounging cross-legged on the ground, was the memory of a young blonde woman, helping out periodically by burrowing another hole or two.
You know nothing ever grows here, right?
I know, but I have to try.
Of course you do.
There was something incredibly sad about her smile as she gazed at his turned back.
You know, I think I could get quite good at this whole planting thing. I'm certainly getting a lot of practice. What? I thought you great flat-coated puns.
Sorry, I'm just having trouble picturing Lucy Bleedin Miller with a lovely little rose garden.
Oh, stuff it, you.
Oh, come on. One prick on your finger and you'd cut the whole thing down. You can't lie to me, Miss Miller. I know you too well.
It was then that the gravekeeper first spotted me, approaching from a few graves away. All of the humour drained from him in seconds, along with all the colour in his face. The laughter died in his throat as if he choked on it, and his whole body stiffened.
What are you doing here? You shouldn't... Go away!
Oi, there's no need to be like that.
I could see the fight within the gravekeeper's eyes as he tried to compose himself, pushing down wave after wave of something on the verge of panic. I couldn't understand his reaction. What had I done? Why didn't he want to see me?
Listen, I know why you came. But you really don't... You shouldn't be here. It's not good for you.
A sick feeling began to rise in me as I stared into his face. A feeling I had never felt before. Whatever it was, it felt like I was choking on it. It sat like a crushing boulder in my stomach and crawled its way up my throat. It was as if the air was made of poison and all of the fog had been forced suddenly into my lungs. And as I looked into the gravekeeper's eyes, I somehow knew this feeling. Grief. A deep, searing, incomprehensible mixture of loss and regret and shame that had burned through this had-been with a ferocity unlike anything else. A single, horrible question started to blaze in my head. What had he done?
Please. You'd be better off if you just forgot me.
He's wrong, you know. He just needs to realise it.
I found the gravekeeper some time later, sitting alone on a bench, staring off into the unending field of tombstones. He didn't even turn to look as I approached and sat by his side. His eyes were nearly as clouded over as the sky, staring out without really seeing. And there he stayed, sitting in the silence, watching over the graves.
I used to hope that the sun would shine here one day. It was foolish. Why would the sun ever want to come here?
I considered this for a moment, taking in the cold, sweeping winds and the empty, biting air. It certainly seemed to be a less than inviting place.
I have nothing to share, you know. Nothing at all.
The boulder in my stomach returned as I stared at the gravekeeper, as I noticed how the little tremors in his hands infected his body, causing his shoulders to tremble and his face to contort into a terrible mask of pain. The burning question returned, unrelenting. What had he done?
You really don't want to know. You really don't.
The sickness was rolling off him in waves until it became too much to endure. I recoiled unconsciously from him and looked again at the gravestones. The countless, endless gravestones that stretched on into infinity. Beneath each carved stone I tried to imagine the fallen, sleeping forever in this barren place, being eaten away by the earth into nothing. The sheer scale of it came crashing down onto me. How could anyone even grasp the concept of a tragedy so innumerable?
I tend to the graves so that no one else has to. I stay so that you can go off and be wonderful.
He turned his head and looked me straight in the eye.
So that you can make it worth it. Because it has to be worth it.
The weight of his words struck me, froze me to the spot, and suddenly that question that had burned in my head was replaced with another. Do you regret it?
Yes.
Would you do it again?
Yes.
The workshop was busy, to say the least. Clutter made up of thousands of bits and pieces and machines and everything else scattered the floor and lined the walls. The work tables were littered with half-finished projects and mysterious baubles of all kinds. But the walls were what caught my attention. The walls that were made up of a constantly moving kaleidoscope of exposed gears and lights turning and circling on and on, almost as if the room itself existed as a smaller part of some huge machine. If you looked long enough, it almost seemed as if the wall was dancing. The tinkerer was hunched far over a work table, fiddling with some kind of tiny instrument. His light shone brilliantly from his hands, like little sparks in the air, illuminating his contented face as he focused on his task. I edged closer with interest. A part of me knew that I wouldn't understand whatever he was doing, but another part insisted that I look anyway.
Oh good, you're here. Quick, under that dimensional compensator over there.
I looked behind me to see he was indicating to another work table. I approached it hesitantly, unsure of exactly what he wanted me to retrieve. My hand hovered uncertainly over a thin, sharp implement.
Oh, there. Closer, but still no.
I stared wide-eyed at the surface, desperately trying to find whatever it was that the tinkerer wanted. But there was nothing else on the desk. Just the little baubles I'd already pointed at, and the wall of moving gears and devices in the wall beyond it. A kindly knowing smile lit up the tinkerer's face as I turned back to him in confusion.
It's alright. It's not that hard to find, I promise. Here, I'll help.
He turned his open palm up and blew softly on it. The glowing particles that had clung to him like fine golden dust erupted towards me in a gust of wind. The light reached out like little tendrils as it reached the desk. However, much to my surprise, it kept going, reaching out until it wrapped itself around a single tiny gear inside the moving walls, illuminating it with a warm glow.
Now do you see?
In wonder, I strode over to the illuminated bit of the wall and plucked the little silver gear from it. It was no bigger than the point of a pen, almost invisible in my hand. The moment the piece was removed, the gear surrounding it grinded to a halt, the little lights in the machinery blinking out, creating a dark, unmoving hole in the dancing wall. The delight I had felt at discovering the piece died down a bit as I clutched it to my chest, staring at the dark hole.
Fantastic. Give it here.
I pushed away the little seed of guilt inside me. It was only one tiny bit of the machine anyway. What harm could it do? The rest of the room was still swirled with the movements of the machinery, hardly even noticing the small missing piece. I brought it over to the tinkerer and watched with fascination as he snatched the tiny piece of metal from me and dove back into his work.
There we are.
The implement seemed to come alive. A delightful whirring chirp of electronics leapt from it like a little song, and the tip suddenly burst alive with an impossibly bright blue light. But nothing compared to the warm humming it filled my palm. This time I really did try to laugh.
I like it too. Go on. We're not done yet.
He snatched up my hand in his, and we ran out through a circular hallway I had failed to notice at first. I let him lead me through the twisting corridors, winding this way and that, passing mysterious door after mysterious door. I wondered where he was taking us.
On an adventure!
At the end of the corridor sat a heavy door. I stared at it for a moment, a chill suddenly riding down me. There was something so very unlike the rest of this place behind that door. I could feel it. I glanced back at the tinkerer, unsure of what to do. He gestured enthusiastically back to the door, his eyes holding something indescribable in their depths.
I can't continue.
Suddenly I felt very unsure, shifting my eyes back and forth from the door to him. I was to go on alone? The notion wasn't a very exciting one, I thought. The tinkerer's expression changed as he looked at me. It grew suddenly sadder, as if one of the gravekeeper's clouds had rushed over his head.
I understand. You don't have to go if you don't want to. There's no shame in that.
The door loomed, waited. It crept up on me slowly, unnoticeably, the unshakable feeling that I needed to know what was behind that door. Why had he called it back in the room?
An adventure.
Stealing a breath, I pushed open the big, dark door. The view at first was almost anticlimactic. For a moment I wondered if there was simply nothingness behind the threshold, and then I took a step through the doorway. The room was incredibly dark and cavernous, but I began to notice that the walls in there were indeed as silver as the others. However, there was nothing moving inside these walls, no life to speak of. Instead, the gears that made up the walls were as still and silent as the darkness surrounding them. Instead of turning, these gears oozed. Thick black liquid dripped forlornly from the gears. A vile taste of bitterness and rot swept over my tongue, clogging my senses in its unpleasantness. A cold shiver ran down me as I looked upon the walls. So dark, so empty, so unlike anything else I had seen here. Why was this here? Why didn't the tinkerer want to enter? Why did he send me here? I don't want to be here.
Well, hello there.
I spun around faster than I had thought was strictly possible, to see a tall, dark-haired man grinning down at me. His smile was wider than perhaps any other smile I had ever seen. His eyes sparkled blue mischief, and his long coat flapped even in the absence of any detectable wind.
And who must you be?
I had no answer for him.
How do you do? Not the talkative type, I see. Well, that's all right. I can do enough talking for the two of us.
He gave me a wicked look.
Mind you, talking isn't all there is. What's with the scared face? Ah, the dog had a little quest for you, huh?
I didn't answer.
Well, if it's a quest from him, I guess we better go get it.
He held out an open palm to me, an invitation, waiting for a companion.
Don't want to be left behind, do you?
On an impulse, I reached out and grasped it, and together we marched out into the darkness.
Well, how was it? Did you get it?
I held out my hand in response, revealing a little gear, still dripping with the remains of the black ooze. The tinkerer leapt up and swept it out of my hand in one move. I felt strangely cold as I watched him hop about. Something inside me insisted that something wasn't right. As the tinkerer looked back at me in his joy, I felt a question begin to bubble up inside of me. The question was on the tip of my... something. Why had he taken all these pieces I could see around me and brought them here? Why did he steal?
You see bits of that place all around here, don't you?
I nodded, and he nodded with me.
Well, the parts have to come from somewhere, don't they?
I pondered this slowly, remembering the horrible black emptiness of the other place, and the bright goldenness of this place. The tinkerer let out a sigh, dropping down beside me. I was stunned to see all that eccentricity leave him, to be replaced with melancholy as he sat on the floor at my feet. After a quiet moment, I sank down with him and asked another question.
Will it last? No. No? Probably not.
He spun the gear over and over again in his palm.
But you can't worry about that forever, can you? It works for now. Right this very instant. That's all that really matters.
What about when it stops working? I found myself wondering.
When it stops? Well, you still have all the pieces, don't you?
He unfurled his hand, holding up the little silver gear almost reverently.
Don't spend your life thinking about the past or future. But seeing what's happening right now is far more important. Live as you are right now. Forge your own path. Fate can wait till tomorrow.
The ballroom was vast, with sweeping marble walls lined with mirrors on every side. It was with a small twinge of delight that I discovered the vaguest shadow of a being staring back at me through the mirror. It wasn't exactly something, but I was close. My eyes drifted away from myself as I marvelled at the beauty of this world. The pillars that held it up were adorned with pieces of multicoloured mosaic that came together to create a formless display of colours. Every colour one could possibly imagine. The dancer stood all alone on his dance floor, waiting. He held one hand outstretched before him, as if he was waiting for someone to accept it. I moved awkwardly towards him, unsure if I should interrupt.
Hello there. I've been expecting you. Well, I say expecting, more like wondering. Well, I say wondering. I mean, you were bound to show up eventually, weren't you?
I glimpsed a moment of melancholy in his big eyes. I wondered why. The dancer blinked and the sadness was gone.
Well, you're here now. I'd ask you to dance with me, but I'm waiting for someone.
This someone was certainly taking their time. As soon as that thought left me, a figure popped into the ballroom. Typical. I looked over to see the warmest, happiest expression spread across the dancer's face as he gazed at his new partner. She slipped her slender hand into his.
Well then, shall we?
She grinned and the dancer returned it, wrapping her in both arms and sweeping her elegantly across the ballroom floor into a waltz. I watched in fascination as the pair dipped and strutted and twirled in perfect step, smiling the entire time.
Careful, you're making me dizzy.
I'm terribly sorry, Miss Tyler. How improper of me.
Your impropriety is forgiven, good sir.
The dancer laughed at her and she laughed back as they pranced merrily around the hall, hand in hand. Then the dancer dipped her with a grace and gentleness unmatched by any other. He dipped her low until her shoulders nearly brushed against the floor. He gave her a joyous smile and then she was gone. There was no shock in the dancer's face as he remained bowed, his arms still outstretched around a now non-existent form. Instead there was only a distant, knowing sadness. I felt his heartbreak grow inside me, empty and aching. The two of us dwelt on our heartbreak in the hollow ballroom, in silence. I wondered if the silence would go on forever. And then, just like that, the dancer's arms were no longer empty. A new memory popped into place, dipped between the dancer's hands. His face lit up as she gave him an infectious smirk, straightening him out of his bow.
Don't tell me you were going to stand like that all day.
She promptly took one of his hands off her waist and placed it smartly over her shoulder. Arching her back out confidently, she led him into a jaunty foxtrot.
I was waiting for you, my Martha Jones. Seeing as you were late.
Something you should know about me is, I'm never late, mister. You must have been early.
Well...
The dancer seemed to be at a loss for words as he focused on keeping up with the memory's complicated footwork.
I must have been a bit excited then.
About me? I'm flattered.
The dancer's big eye roll didn't manage to hide his smirk. He lifted his hand high above her head and threw her into a fast twirl. Before the end of the spin, she was gone. The dancer stared at the spot where she had been before, letting his hand fall limply at his side. He turned away, facing the mirror behind him, his eyes closed. I felt a very peculiar mixture of emotions rise in me as I watched him, the very image of melancholy and perhaps something deeper. I had no time to dwell on it, however, as a fiery red-haired memory tapped the dancer expectantly on the shoulder.
Oi!
Before he even had time to respond or gather himself, the memory pulled him into a triple-time jive. She laughed at him as he fought for a moment to keep his feet under him.
A bit clumsy today, are we, spaceman? Had a little too much happy juice, have we?
I am a Time Lord. I don't have happy juice.
Oh yeah. Then how do you explain the two left feet, Time Lord? Do they not have dance lessons on Mars?
I'm not from Mars.
At that they both collapsed into fits of laughter, clinging to each other in order to keep the dance going. Their performance went on for several more impossibly joyous moments, their infectious moods swelling in my chest. And then suddenly the memory stumbled to a halt, losing her grip on her partner. The dancer quickly stopped himself and came to her side.
What's the matter? Can't keep up with my fancy footwork?
No, it's just the steps.
Her face grew suddenly blank.
I forgot.
I could feel nothing but shock, and after a moment overwhelming guilt. The dancer backed slowly away from the empty spot, all his energy forgotten, and there he stayed for several moments, lost in his stupor. I wanted to turn away. What was next? Another partner? Another heartbreak? And yet I couldn't bring myself to turn away as the dancer deliberately outstretched his hand again. But no one came. Not this time. He waited until it became quite clear that no one else was coming. Then, and only then, he turned to me.
Would you like to join me?
Something in his eyes wasn't entirely welcoming. A sense of approach, perhaps even fear. He was expectant, but certainly not welcoming. I drew myself closer, considering the hand. What would happen if I took it?
Trust me.
I took a breath and slipped my hand into his. He pulled me slowly into dance, guiding me across the floor. He gave me a little smile as he did.
It's sad, isn't it? Why would you ever start a dance if you know it's going to end?
I couldn't find an answer.
We dance because we love it, even though it ends. Love deeply and love unconditionally. It'll be worth it in the end.
His eyes sparkled like the stars.
It's always worth it in the end.
There was something so different about the meadow at night. All the colours of the sky and the grass and the sporadic wild flowers submitted to the persistent blanket of dark, inky blueness. It was a curious thing, the blueness. The sky at night was not blue, it was an empty, gaping black. So why was there blueness? Where did it come from? I almost didn't see the artist as I glided through the blue meadow. Eventually I spotted him, a soft light blue glow against the rest of the darker hue. I wondered idly if he was the one casting the blueness. He was lying flat on his back in the exact centre of the meadow, staring up into the empty sky. I tried to follow his gaze up to find what he was staring at so raptly, but I could find no point of interest up above. Just more black.
No, that's not true at all. You're just not seeing properly. It's obvious, really.
I looked back up into the black sky again. How could I not be seeing properly? There was nothing to see.
There is so much to see. Here, lie with me.
I took his hand hesitantly and allowed him to pull me down into the grass beside him. There he sat for several long moments, staring up into the blackness above.
You know when you've been outside on an impossibly sunny day for hours and you first step into the house with all the lights turned off?
I shook my head in confusion.
When you first step into the house, you can't see a thing because your eyes have become so used to the brightness that everything else looks impossibly dark in comparison. Well, that's what this is like.
He suddenly frowned.
Actually, it's not like that at all. Forget I said that.
I felt the confusion returning as I looked at this funny little man staring up into the nothingness.
Look up.
Still not fully understanding why, I allowed my eyes to follow his up into the sheet of total darkness.
You see the blackness? It's so impossibly dark, isn't it? It just seems almost too dark to be black, doesn't it? It's somehow more than that and less than that at the same time. But you're wrong. There's brightness up there too. It's just a little harder to notice.
I blinked, trying to see anything other than the darkness.
Do you see it? Right there. You see that bit in between the blackness? It's not exactly brightness, but it's not darkness either. The longer you stare at it, the more obvious the contrast becomes. The black fades away, softens into the beginnings of light, white light. It's very clear now, isn't it? A star, twinkling with bright, blazing white light.
I gazed in wonder. How had I not noticed it before? It was the most obvious thing in the world. A single pinprick within an endless field of black. The artist leapt to his feet without warning. I followed him slowly as he dashed further down the meadow. He stopped in front of a tall easel and canvas. I plodded my way over to him as he rummaged distractedly in his pockets, finally pulling out a handful of paintbrushes. He selected one and began his work. A shade of bluish blackness blossomed onto the canvas from his brush, each stroke blanketing the surface with more and more darkness, until it seemed to be part of the sky itself. The artist paused to contemplate for a moment, before setting his brush to the page again. This time he painted the surface with more precision, dotting it with tiny little splashes of brilliant bright white against the darker shades. I stared at them, mesmerised by the brightness of those tiny little points. Why was he painting so many stars when there was only one? He filled the sky with twinkling lights, and I found myself wishing the real sky looked like that.
Look up.
The sight was stunning. Hundreds, thousands, millions of stars hung above my head in a sheet of breathtaking beauty. I stared, unable to look away.
You missed one.
What? No, I didn't.
Yeah, you did. Right there, see? No Rachel.
The artist turned back to scrutinise his work.
Ridiculous. I would never miss something so... Yes, well, that's an easy mistake to make. Anyone could do it. How did you even know where that was?
The memory smirked.
It's in Orion's constellation.
Oh yes, the Roman.
Are you having fun without me?
We wouldn't dream of it.
I blinked in surprise as a bizarrely dressed memory strode towards us. He was in a brilliant red and gold suit of armour, a gleaming sword attached to his hip.
Oh, you're here. What took you so long?
The memory rolled his eyes before turning to me.
I hope he didn't confuse you too much.
And what's that supposed to mean?
Did he say that thing about staring into the sun? Yeah, I don't get it either. Better to just smile and nod.
I smiled at that as I turned back to watch the artist's frantic painting. The artwork now had 2 figures in it. The memory of the red hair and the soldier, and something else too. I hadn't noticed it at first, but there was definitely a 3rd figure there. I stared hard, trying to identify any solid features, and I found that I couldn't.
It's you. Can you feel it? Can you feel yourself growing into existence?
I shook my head unconsciously. How could I possibly answer that? How would I even know what existence felt like if I had it? The artist gave me a full smile, gently pulling me closer to the canvas.
Here.
He placed a paintbrush in my hand.
Just think. Think of what it is that fills you up on the inside. What is the essential thing deep inside you that makes you, you? And then just let it flow through the page.
I don't know exactly how I did it. What it was that I pulled from as I painted stroke after stroke. And yet something was there. Something inside me that moved the brush. I felt a great unrestrained rush of joy fill me, dancing through me and into the artwork. The sheer intensity of it stunned me, rooted me to the spot. Where had that come from? How could there even be so much joy stored inside one person?
There is joy in everything. Every person, every painting, every sky, every star. You just have to look hard enough to find it.
We gazed up into the sky. The call drew me. How could it not? It was so yearning and mysterious and demanding of attention, like a song on the wind. I made my way to it. Each step landed on a new surface. Grass, sand, cobblestone, dirt. What a sensation it was! To no longer simply drift, but to interact with the things around me, as if I truly did exist. As I walked, fascinated by my own footsteps, I began to notice something else as well. A quiet pair of footsteps walking side by side with me. For every one of my footfalls, there was one to match by my side, and as hard as I looked, there was no person to make them. Just an empty space beside me. Well, not exactly empty, just simply unseen. I could feel their presence brushing up against me. A warm... no, not warm. A burning soul walking hand in hand with me, yet not quite there. It was so unlike anything I'd ever felt before, and yet it fueled me, embraced me. I was getting closer to the call, I could feel it. And as I drew closer, the more aware I became of the entities around me. I don't know when they first appeared, but as I looked around me, I became suddenly very aware of their presence. Memories and ghosts and nightmares and figurements pressing in from all sides. They were all speaking, a cacophony of voices and sounds and whispers all mixed together into a terrible storm.
Say hello to my granddaughter, will you, Doctor?
Say hello to my daughter. Don't end up like
Say hello to my daughter. Don't end up
Say hello to my daughter.
Say hello to my daughter.
Don't end up like
Say hello to my daughter. Don't end up like
Say hello to my daughter. Don't end up like me.
Say hello to my daughter. Don't end up
Die, my dear Doctor, you must die.
I love you. Must die.
My dear doctor, I love you. My dear doctor,
Die, my dear doctor.
I love you.
You must die.
I love you. Must die.
Die, my dear doctor, I love you. You must die.
Doctor, you must
die, my dear doctor. Die.
You must die.
I hate you. I hate. Help me.
You must die.
I hate you.
Terrible trouble.
Don't forget you always got me into the most terrible
Don't forget me. Oh, terrible trouble.
You always got me into the most terrible.
Don't forgive me, I can't be allowed to continue.
Don't forget me. You're always allowed to
Don't forget me.
I hope you'll forgive me. The doctor must not be allowed to continue.
The doctor must not be allowed to continue.
Don't forget me.
The doctor must not be allowed to
Terrible trouble.
I hope you'll forgive me one day. The doctor must not be allowed to continue.
I hope you'll forgive me one day. Doctor must not be allowed to continue.
Stop him, stop her.
Doctor
Stop
must
it,
not
stop
be allowed
her.
to continue. I hope you'll forgive me one day.
Stop him, stop her.
Stop it! Stop her! Stop him!
Stop.
Stop it! It was too much. Stop! Stop! I can't take like it.
What was it you always told me?
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 My steps started to a halt as they pushed and pushed, grabbing hold of me,
Sanctimonious.
pulling me apart.
Hypocrite!
All this sensation, all this
Fantastic.
feeling, all this responsibility.
Trickster.
It was tearing my very being apart.
Cruel.
I tried to scream and found that I couldn't.
Kindly.
And then
Doctor!
And then it stopped. I could feel them more than I could see them. They were all around me, protecting me, shielding me from the outside. The could-bes. They spread out around me on all sides, both somehow so limited yet infinite in their existence. I felt a pang of something, a realization. I wasn't like them anymore. I don't think I am like anything anymore. I am something else entirely. I trekked on, accompanied by a crowd of the entities matching my every step, and accompanied by those burning footsteps walking side by side. The walk was long, but I didn't mind. As I travelled closer and closer to the source of the call, I could feel its hum beneath my feet. Low, humming vibrations shaking the ground ever so slightly, moving through me like a living, breathing thing. The entities began to peel off as they felt it, faltering further and further behind until one by one they disappeared from view. Some waved goodbye, some slunk off into the shadows, and still others just watched unmoving as I drew further and further away. And then the could-bes left. It was like they took a part of me with them as they drifted away, back to their non-existence. I watched them leave, feeling an aching in my heart, and when I turned around I saw it. A great pillar of golden fire stretching up into forever. My steps faltered as I saw it. Even from this distance the air pulsed with its raw, unbridled power. I froze to the spot, struck utterly still by the marvel before me. There was no end to it, stretching up past the end of the sky and out into that void of infinite darkness, the unknown. Burning footsteps faltered too, and then the fire called to me again, the pull, the need intensifying tenfold. I had never felt this before, such intense fear and intense need fighting inside of me. The need won out as I felt myself taking a shaky step forwards, and then another, and then another. The footsteps joined me. I could hardly breathe as I took in the sight before me. Lined up on either side of a short part of the column of fire stood the Hadbeens. Every single one of them, from the librarian to the artist, stood watching. The little path that they had made between them, like a red carpet, led straight up to the golden fire. I was so close that I could feel the actual heat radiating off it. So hot, so frightful. I stopped again. What awaited me in that terrifying flame?
Everything.
The gardener smiled his warmest smile,
Maybe nothing.
and the gravekeeper looked at me with his sad eyes.
That's up to you.
Do you dare?
It might be fantastic.
It might be sad.
You must take a leap of faith, my dear boy.
How are you supposed to make new discoveries without the existence of the unknown?
Oh, there could be music out there.
And art.
And adventure.
I stared at all of the Hadbeens, the afterglow of life pulsing in them, flowing from them to the fire and back again, and I understood. What a truly wonderful feeling it was, true understanding. The Hadbeens had come from that fire. They had been born amongst the flames, fueled by the raw golden power of life. They had had a taste of the unknown, and that is what had made them into who they are. And now it was my turn. The footsteps and I pulled closer. We stood only a single pace from it now. My entire body shook from the power of it. It was time. Time to be born anew. I chanced a single glance back at the joyous Hadbeens before I took that last step and entered the flame. It was hot and cold and pain and pleasantness. It was everything and nothing all at once. I couldn't breathe. I didn't need to breathe. For the smallest of moments I registered those footsteps next to me. And then we were intertwining. I came to realise very suddenly that we had never really been apart. We were one. The oneness had always been there. The realisation made me laugh. How ridiculous to think that we could ever have been apart. And as I laughed, he laughed. This is how we were meant to be. I didn't ever want to leave. And then the feeling began to fall away. The presence, the oneness ebbed away. He was gone. He was gone! Where did he go? And that was when I opened my eyes. There he was, clear as day. Through his eyes I could see myself there, clear as day. We were still the same, but the oneness was over. And as the fire fell away, he faded from me, falling away into the beyond, as I now recognised it to be. The end of life, perhaps, but a new beginning all the same. Alive. I'm alive. The universe, my life, faded into reality around me, and I knew for the first time in both my existence and my non-existence exactly who I was. I am the Doctor.
Oh, brilliant.
Such Stuff as Dreams was a Spectral Horizons production written and directed by Taya Van Dyke. Produced by Flame of Terrasen, Kellogg and Taya Van Dyke. Edited by Taya Van Dyke, Kellogg and Sherl. Composed by Sherl, J.I. Fleming and Antonio Alvarez. Foley by Kellogg. With the title theme by Alex Rooney and title visuals by J.A. Marshall. Illustrations by Ruby Skye. Cover art by Kellogg. The Could Be was played by Ruby Skye. The Librarian, Jamie McCrimmon. The Gardener, Turlough. The Tinkerer, Jack Harkness and Rory Williams, Caleb Hott. The Musician and the Nightmare, Marcus Cotton. The Scientist and the Professor, Joey Morgan. The Storyteller, the Clown and the Gravekeeper, Brian Corrigan. The Dancer, Jack Reeves. The Artist, Jamie Courtier. Susan, Evelyn Smith, Donna Noble, and the Nightmare, Kai Clayton. Liz Shaw, Leela, Nissa, Ace McShane, Lucy Miller, Rose Tyler, Martha Jones, and Amy Pond, Taya Van Dyke. Sarah Jane Smith, Romana and Tegan, Jen Sweet. K9 and the Nightmare, Zach Rosenfield. Adric, Darlic 1J. Other parts were played by members of the cast.